Looks like it's working there. Great. Well, welcome everybody to the United Nations Association Marin County Chapter event for the Sustainable Development Goal. You might hear us say SDG as an acronym, number 2, zero hunger. This is a event series, so we're doing this every other month. We had one in, I believe it was September, skipped October, here we are in November, and then approximately the second weekend of January, we will be moving on to number 3, good health and well-being, and that's again Sustainable Development Goal number 3. And we'll go over this briefly again at the end, but for those of you who don't know, the United Nations Association is a network of over 200 chapters across the United States. I sort of think of us as the civic supporters or almost cheerleaders for the United Nations. For those of us in the US, on the one hand, the United Nations as a whole, as an organization, is financially quite dependent on the United States, while at the same time, the work of the UN often happens elsewhere. So we as citizens don't always know the activities that go on around the globe. And so part of what we do as the UNA is we help educate our local people about the important work that happens around the globe. So with the Sustainable Development Goals, that's kind of the direction we've taken, is kind of 50% educating our members and community about the important work that happens around the globe that the United Nations heads up. And then the other 50% is looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, which were released by the United Nations in 2015, and asking, are we meeting those goals? Are we meeting this vision, this very high vision for the well-being of everybody on planet Earth? So I am going to turn it over briefly to Harpreet, another one of our local members who's also on the Sustainable Development Goals Committee. So Harpreet.
Hi everyone, my name is Harpreet. I'm the co-host for today's event. I went to College of Marin, I transferred to UCSC, and thanks for all being here.
Thank you, Harpreet. So Harpreet is our co-host or our co-MC for today's event. And so before we get started, again, of course, just making sure everyone has your mic muted if you're not speaking. So Harpreet, do you have our brief introduction to SDG number 2, Marin and You're still on mute, Harpreet, if you're speaking. I think she might be having a hard time coming off of mute. Harpreet, can you hear me? Huh. I wonder if can everybody else hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Felicia, can you send her a message? Can you just write her a little note?
Yeah, I will do that. Oh, Harpreet, I see you came off of mute, but I still can't hear you for some reason. Oh, now I can hear you.
So SDGmarin.org is Felicia is primarily working on it. It's the Sustainable Development Goals locally. So the development goals that we have on the global scale, it's based how can we do as a Marin. So how in Marin can we work on them or as a community. So that's what it is all about. Yeah.
And Harpreet, did you have anything to say about SDG number 2 and facts related to Marin County before we get started?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to share my screen here briefly. What Harpreet was sharing with everyone is this website, which If you type the letters sdgmarin.org into your web browser, it will redirect you to this URL. And what it is kind of a sketch of a website or a draft. And so if you scroll down, you'll see a little blurb about what this draft is about. You'll see all of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And slowly over time, we're making each one live. So for number 1, no poverty, if you click on it and it has that dashed box around it, you'll see a recording of our number 1 no poverty event that we had back in September with some facts related to that particular sustainable development goal. And I just made live in the last couple of days, number 2, zero hunger. And if you scroll down, you'll see some summary. So I said to be continued because after today's event, we'll know a little bit more about what those top level things we want everyone to know about hunger or food access in Marin County should be. I've embedded one video that I found on YouTube about hunger in Marin County, a couple of reports, and I don't have any databases or it looks like I have one booked linked to a PDF book. And this is Tales of Marin's Community Gardens, which is a list of different community gardens and some information about them in Marin County. And then here we have the, each global goal has a list of targets underneath it. So these are the global targets, and the suggestion here is to develop local targets, and then a list of organizations that do work in this, number 2, zero hunger kind of arena. And then a link to the United Nations website where it goes into details about global facts related to number 2, zero hunger. So I'm going to leave it there for the moment and glance at our agenda, make sure I'm on topic here. So I'm going to introduce Kathryn Johnson, who is our first speaker. Thank you, Kathryn, for joining us today. And let me just read your bio, which I have handy here. Okay, so Kathryn E. Johnson served as the Chief Executive Officer of Health Forum for 25 years, retired January 1 of 2002. She is the co-founder of the Center for Global Service and an active consultant on global health issues. So Ms. Johnson also served on the board of the UN's World Food Program USA. And Global Women's Leadership Program at Santa Clara University's Business School, as well as the Health and Technology Center. And Kathryn completed her graduate work at Boston University. Kathryn has served on numerous boards, including chairing the boards of the Institute for Research on Learning and the American Society of Association Executives, and is a former W.K. Kellogg Foundation Fellow and currently serves on the board of the Food Commons, OmniMed, Renew, International Leadership Association, and IP3. I wonder what that is. That's a cryptic title there. In addition, Kathryn serves on the advisory board of MedShare. Oh, we're having some background noise. I'm not sure whose line that is. But if you can be sure to mute if you're not on mute. So in addition, Kathryn serves on the advisory board of MedShare, Living Goods, We Care Solar, UN Women of Northern California, and the Consciousness Healing Network. And recently she co-chaired the development of Collective Impact Partners. Great, and then I believe you live in Green Bay, is that correct, Kathryn? Kentfield, okay, I was close. Great, so Kathryn has a presentation for us. She'll be speaking for about 20 minutes or so. And then we will switch to Ryan Thayer, our second speaker. Kathryn is sort of our global level perspective person with regard to SDG number 2, zero hunger, and Ryan is our local level perspective speaker. And then we'll have Q&A wrapping up around 4 o'clock and beginning Q&A. So I am going to turn it over to you, Kathryn.
Great, I'm just opening my slides. Are they showing up?
Have you hit the green share screen button?
I did. Did it work?
And then did you pick the screen you wanted to share and say, okay?
Good. I have it on my screen, but maybe you don't have it on yours. I'll escape again and we'll try it one more time. Okay.
Still don't see it. Oh, now it's coming.
Great. I'm hitting play now. So see if we have got it now.
Got it.
Excellent.
Thanks everyone for your patience. I'm new to Zooming and sharing. Thank you very much, Felicia and Paul, for this opportunity. I'm really delighted to talk with you today about the work that's going on worldwide by the UN to solve world hunger. This is one of the most pressing issues facing humanity. This global threat is something I believe you're going to hear a lot more about for the next 12 months. And over the next few minutes, I'm going to share why I think this is such an urgent issue for us to all be aware of and to have a better sense of. During my experience on the UN World Food Programme Board, I had the great opportunity to go to about 25 countries in Africa, about half of the continent. And I've been to 6 or 7 of the 7 countries in Central America. And these are some of the real hot spots in the world of food insecurity. And food insecurity is another byword for hunger, and it's defined as a state of being without a reliable access to a sufficient quantity of affordable nutrition food. And you might be interested to know that there are 34 nations in the world that have no plan to feed their populations. And this is a big effort of the UN World Food Programme, is to help nations develop a strategy to feed their people. So this leading humanitarian organization is really quite an impressive one to know about. And our focus at UNWFP is on the most vulnerable. And it might intrigue you to know that today in the world, about 690 million people are food insecure. And of those, 149 million who are experiencing what they call the most acute levels of hunger. And these individuals are largely in areas that are experiencing conflict and where there's, through climate change or other events, a displacement of these people. And then another 2 billion people in the world today suffer from what they call hidden hunger. And that's a condition caused by insufficient diet. They may be eating something, but the nutrients are not sufficient to sustain their growth. And this is particularly problematic for young children. So one of the points I want to make today is the impact of this SDG goal, zero hunger, and its interconnection, its systemic link to all the others, but particularly the top panel on this slide. Poverty is a contributor to hunger. Obviously, it affects health and well-being. Number 3, education is a key strategy of the UN World Food Programme. Every time we put in school feeding programs, we get 50% girls. And that ends up being a gender equity play. So the systemic link among and between this particular SDG and all the others is very, very strong. And I'll be making that point a little more fully as we go through our discussion today. The reason I think that this is going to be an SDG that will be a lot more in the news are the combined impacts of COVID, this pandemic, climate change, the migration and conflicts I referred to earlier, and the consequential economic downturn, which is creating a real rise in food prices. All of these issues are huge contributors to the problem of food insecurity. And the projections are that between now and the end of 2020, 67 million additional people will be pushed into extreme poverty and into a position of being food insecure, 69 million. So this is creating a huge challenge for WFP. So we are behind in the goal of getting to zero hunger in the world. And after many years, actually many decades of substantial progress, the leadership in WFP is really worried about their 4 key areas: ensuring access to food, bringing down these levels of malnutrition, making sure there's enough food available, and then making these food systems around the world more resilient. I want to talk just a moment about the impact of COVID on food insecurity. It's having devastating impacts. I mentioned this increase in the number. As unemployment rises, it means that it's more and more difficult to put food on the table. And the economic fallout of the pandemic is this pushing 70 to 100 million people into poverty by the end of the year. So you can begin to see the enormous systemic links between this pandemic and climate change and some of the other issues I've mentioned on world hunger. The pandemic is having its greatest impact on Latin America, where there's been a almost 270% increase in hunger. But it has become more extreme in regions that are once known for conflict, like Yemen, Pakistan, etc., and those affected by climate change, Haiti, in the news a lot these days, where millions of people are facing the impending threat of famines once again. So there's a lot on the plate for the UN World Food Program, given the conditions we're seeing in our world today. I have 3 goals for our quick session this morning. One, I hope to describe how hunger is really expressing itself as this very serious global threat. 2, I'd like to make this connection, as I've begun to do, between this SDG and the others on the list. And 3, I want to share the innovative work that the World Food Program is doing that resulted in its receiving the Nobel Peace Prize this year. WFP is the best known brand of all of the brands within the UN in the developing world, and the least well known in the developed world, in contrast to, say, WHO or UNICEF. But WFP is the one brand that really puts the face on climate change, because so many of the impacts on agricultural production are being affected by droughts and floods and other conditions that we're seeing in the world today that are climate change related. There's also something happening today that I thought would intrigue you, and that's called the food system paradox. Interestingly, today we have over 1 billion people that are overweight in the world, in the developing world largely, less than 1 billion that are underweight. And this is an example where poverty manifests itself differently in the North and South, and where food insecurity does. You see here 50% of Haiti is malnourished, but 40% of Brazil and 61% of America are overweight. So about 1/3 of the world's population has a food system that's not working for their health and well-being. And the bigger long-term goal that we're working on is feeding 9 billion people on the planet by 2050, amidst all the other problems that I've just alluded to. So many people believe that this is calling for a major overhaul in our thinking about food system development resilience. Pardon me. When I was serving on the board, I got to know Josette Saran, who was the executive director of WFP, and she had this great quote that we're living in a world where risk is the new normal, and all the kinds of crises I've just discussed are creating these shocks that can put millions of people into hunger, just as we're seeing COVID do today. I want to enforce here that women account for more than 2/3 of the world's poor and the majority of the farmers in the world, and they bear the brunt of rising food prices and this issue of food insecurity. Interestingly, they make up 43% of the farmers in the developing world, and they are only 15% of the landowners. So a big push by WFP is to help women become better farmers, to put them into co-ops and help them ensure greater food security for their families. When I was in Ghana, they set up 20 co-ops of women farmers, and these same women farmers produce all the food for the school lunch programs. They processed the food, they fortified it with the right nutrients for the age-appropriate nature of the kids, and they were the most stable market for food could happen. So again, a gender equity play coupled with a response that has food resiliency built into it for a country. I love this feature. If women farmers were given the same access to resources that male farmers were, they are actually better farmers than men in many cases. Up to 20% of their production is higher. and we could reduce malnourishment by empowering women farmers. So again, the tie back to the gender equity. The cost of food is a big issue in the world. I thought you'd be interested in this data point. Bean stew in New York is about 0.6% of a person's daily income, but the same meal in the Sudan is 2,001 points. So the cost of food is a big issue worldwide, and there are rising food costs, as I mentioned. Something I think you all would love knowing about that WFP offers is the hunger map. And this hunger map is available to anyone. It's at www.wfp.org hunger map. And it allows you to look at the impact of COVID and the impact of hunger anywhere in the world. And I'm happy to make this presentation available to you, but let me also just encourage you to spend some time with the hunger map. It's a great example where geography and mapping have come together. Google is a great partner of WFP. They help them create these live maps, give you real-time information on what's happening with hunger. I've sort of mentioned how broad the presence of WFP is in the world, 83 offices worldwide with specialists in innovation and development. So what is their response? Well, one of the things they do, of course, is food distribution. And these are some of the basics. What's really important is the last bullet here. They fortify the nutritional products to prevent malnutrition based upon the age and needs. So when I was in Dadaab, which is one of the largest refugee camps in Kenya, mostly Somalis, when a mother goes through to get her food, she has a fingerprint that shows how many children she has, and she gets fortification based upon whether she's pregnant or not, how many children versus seniors in her family. It's a very scientifically and targeted nutritional mix that is given to help people sustain a healthy life. And they're providing food with cash. So in many parts of the world, there's actually enough food available. The country's growing enough, producing enough food, but people can't afford it. So another part of the work is to not disrupt these food markets, but to support them by giving cash for food. And so that's another effort by WFP to stabilize the food markets in countries. One of the big efforts is not just ensuring that people get food, but it's actually ending this malnutrition that I've talked about. And these are some programs that focus specifically on malnutrition. One of them is helping governments develop anti-hunger strategies and ensuring that people have access to food. So we work very closely with local governments and to make their food systems more resilient. Again, WFP would love to work itself out of business. And another example is work we're doing to find innovative solutions in each part of the world to food insecurity. And we're working to strengthen, as I mentioned, the communities by getting people into school. Right now, where so many schools are closed throughout the world, we're setting up alternative feeding programs to help children. We're screening at these schools mothers for malnutrition and working with them very closely through the school feeding program. 370 million children are missing school today because of these closures. So we're doing things to respond to that, because in many cases, this was the only meal the kids were getting a day. It's quite severe. In place of the school feeding programs, we've set up these alternative options, and we're working currently with 17 countries to reopen the schools and to restore this critical food program. Another very critical and something I am very intrigued by is what they call childhood stunting. And this is the mother's malnourished, and it presents itself with an irreversible set of damage to the unborn child, including a lower birth.
I think Kathryn's line is having a hiccup. Hopefully she'll come back.
I put the address to the food map into the chat if anybody's interested. Very interesting.
Thanks, Paul. All right, so technology is causing us some issues here. So we'll give Kathryn a moment to come back. The thing that concerns me is that there were no hiccups in her line at all, and then all of a sudden, completely gone. Oh, thanks, Paul. Paul is stepping in to show us this map that Kathryn was pointing us to earlier, the hunger map on the World Food Program website.
Yeah, it's interesting. Of course, we know we have hunger in the U.S. We're going to hear about that. But there's a lot of hunger in places you'd expect. And there's a lot of missing data. And if those places, if you're thinking of Africa particularly, those places we had good data on, that would be pretty red, I would imagine. One of the countries I work, Niger, I know is a severe food problem, and it's just going to get worse. Anyway, that address is in the chat for anybody who wants to access it.
That was actually, oh,
yeah.
Is that you, Kathryn?
No, it's Marcia.
Oh, Marcia. Hi.
Where is it that you not showing that you know about?
Well, right down the center of Africa, you can see the gray areas. So if you look at the legend, the gray means no data available. Okay.
In terms of your own experience in Africa, does that match up?
Yeah, so if generally if it doesn't have data, it's because there's no efficient government, effective government to bring the data. So you see a rich country like Libya, there's no data because there hasn't been a government since 2011 and 12. Or Somalia, of course, we've heard so much for the last 30 years or so.
And what about your own experience in Africa? Does that match up in terms of where, the red and I don't know where you, mostly in the north, where are you mostly?
So this country, Niger and Tunisia, and then I worked in Guinea during the Ebola crisis, and then Central Africa, so the Democratic Republic of Congo, which has had these terrible wars for 25 years, which are just starting to peter out.
Yeah, that was actually one of my questions about this map, was if it was at the country level, and it looks like it is. Well, so we're still missing Kathryn. So I'm going to suggest that we move on to Ryan, but we'll introduce you first, Ryan, hoping that Kathryn comes back and we'll eventually be able to do the last 5 minutes of her presentation. So it might be a little bit out of order, but nevertheless. So Harpreet, are you prepared to introduce Ryan by reading his bio?
Second panelist is Ryan.
Sorry, Harpreet, you're going to have to speak really loudly.
Do you hear me?
A little bit better.
No? A little bit. Do you hear me now?
Yes, and if everybody else can make sure that your line is muted, if you're not already on mute. Great, thanks. Go ahead, Harpreet.
I'm sorry, just to interrupt on the procedural. So Felicia, do you have to watch for Kathryn to come back in? Or can she get in without you admitting her?
Yeah, there's no waiting room on this call, so she'll be
Okay,
able to
good.
just pop back in.
All right, great, thank you.
So Ryan is our second panelist. He's our local perspective. He is a nutrition and wellness program manager in Marin County Health and Human Services. And he has spent over a decade working to promote equitable local food system by cultivating community power to influence decision-making structures throughout the Bay Area. He has also worked in as a community manager around the food justice issues in San Francisco, and was also the co-founder of, sorry if I mispronounce this, Tenderloin Healthy Corner Store Coalition. He also helped to direct public resources by serving on the Healthy Retail SF Advisory Board, San Francisco Food Security Task Force, and also he's an appointed member of the San Francisco Soda Tax Advisory Committee. Prior to working in the Marin County, he worked for an anti-poverty initiative for Alameda County Board of Supervisors to establish place-based leadership models. And for his background, he has a bachelor's BA in Urban Studies and Planning from San Francisco State University and MA in Urban Affairs from USF. Thank you,
Right
Ryan.
on. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. Let me see if I can share my slides. Is that working? Yep. All right.
Looks good, thanks.
So yeah, so I have been doing food systems work in the Bay Area for quite some time. I'm new to Marin County. I actually started right before COVID hit. So a lot of my experience has been working in San Francisco and the East Bay in Oakland. But as it was mentioned, I work in Health and Human Services in the Department of Public Health in the Community Health and Prevention branch. And I'm also responsible for co-chairing the Marin County Heal Collaborative, which is an effort of around 120 different members who have participated indirectly or more indirectly looking at how to achieve food equity within the county. Previously, for the past couple of years, it was looking at addressing missing meals, and we more recently looked at how we can address food equity within Marin County. And so thinking about food insecurity, I think, within the local level, it's real important to think that there's no real one story or one face of who is food insecure. This is discussed, or the impact, not necessarily something that you can see. Important to really look at how food insecurity within the United States. I think if we look at the map that was shown for the hunger map, whereas the country as a whole might not be highly ranked, but when you look at the specific communities, especially communities of color, and the concentrations of the impacts are really tied to the systemic inequity that we face in this country and the system that's upheld by racial injustice. While food insecurity is not widespread in Marin County, it's about 1 in 5 residents. It is linked directly to us being the most inequitable county in the state, right? And so where we see the concentrations in the pockets of those who are facing food insecurity and facing poverty is really inherent of the inequities that we see within the county. Each community that faces food insecurity faces a very unique challenge that needs to have an innovative solution that meets their specific needs. One thing that I want to point out, that Marin is well known for a lot of the artisan foods and high quality foods that are produced within the county and available at many of the retailers. And often the hands that are feeding us are not paid at wages where they can afford those foods. So many of agricultural workers face food insecurity themselves, while they're the ones that are feeding us these foods. So never want to lose sight of making sure that we're taking care of the folks that are taking care of us. So this is a map of poverty in Marin that was taken in 2018. And so you can see that for the most part, Marin is not facing a lot of poverty. But we do see these high concentrations that in Novato and San Rafael, mainly in the Canal, in Marin City. parts of Bolinas, Stinson Beach, and these are often also the areas where we see the highest concentration.
Ryan,
Needs to be met.
your mic is
Yep.
cutting in and out, so I'm not sure what's causing that problem, but we can mostly hear you though, like 70, 80%.
The video helps.
Oh yeah, great, thanks.
Sorry. Went to a different location thinking I'd have better internet, but maybe I'm have it. So looking countywide, there are about 45,000 people that are living at 185 line. So again, looking most of that. And then also thinking about the food insecurity needs, there's a huge need around isolated seniors that are living on fixed incomes that might not be reflective on the poverty map, but are definitely have challenges in securing food. About 30% of Marin is over 60. And thinking again of these inequities and the disparities within those and around the specific needs, where we see these pockets of poverty and concentrated in communities of color, the elder population in Marin is about 90% white. Looking more recently with the impacts of COVID, and has contributed greatly to the inequities within the county. What we've seen in the case rate in the Latinx community in Marin has actually been one of the most inequitable in the state as well. Following consistently with where Marin has rated in socio. When COVID hit, we see these huge spikes in unemployment. We see a steady increase in the need of food distributions through the food bank. And then we see a large spike in CalFresh enrollment as well. And one thing I definitely want to point out with the large Latinx community being a large at-need population in the county, a lot of the fears that have been projected around public charge, around the federal conversations around Latinx communities, and really what the fears that has for people to enroll in these programs and what that impacts might happen on their legal status in the country. Also thinking about the divide between what's being seen as an essential worker or not, and who has the ability to work at home and self-isolate in home, where we see Latinx communities oftentimes being frontline workers, also living in larger household size, which has actually made a lot of them ineligible for some of the programs. So for example, a lot of the meal delivery programs have been targeted for isolated seniors living alone at home. And often in Latinx communities, elders who might still be in need are living at home with a larger family, and then they're not eligible to receive a meal program. The meal programs that have been available have been more linked food bank distribution sites, which has also been, risk situation dealing with COVID, where food distribution site in Nevada, they're seeing about 500 to 700 people each week, or households each week. And so, you're seeing large numbers of folks that are needing to come out in a steady rate. Food needs to go to get their food. Increase in unemployment, some households have had to go to multiple food distribution sites just to get enough food to go through the week when they're losing employment or their ability to bring income in to secure food for themselves. And similarly to looking at some of the senior delivery programs, about 90% of their clientele has been white. And then the food distribution sites, at least in the two largest, which is ran by Marin Community Clinics in Novato and the Canal, which again, seeing 500 to 700 households each week, is largely Spanish speakers. In this chart, there's a lot going on here, but I think one of the things just to point out is looking at the highest COVID outbreak, looking here in San Rafael, being in the Canal, and in the communities that are the most ethnically diverse. We're also seeing those living below the poverty line, and then also the challenges at the ability to, if the inability to fully meet the need in the communities based on the programs that we have set up. So that, for my opinion, it's really, we have to look at how do we supplement that work with having community-driven solutions to really look at really wanting to fully address hunger, if we want to get to zero hunger, if we want to society, then we really have to look at how are we responding to inequity and how are we looking at this inequitable system that communities to face higher risks. And so the emergency food system, which is largely what we've relied on to address hunger, food distributions, meal programs, the food bank, is really not the solution, right? It's meant to address an emergency. And so we have to not be willing to accept an emergency situation as acceptable and as the normal. And really we'll have to look at how do we reduce the need for people to leverage emergency-based safety net solutions and really have that be something that catches people as a last ditch effort, not the real approach to address hunger. And so this system is really dependent on food donations and is tapped into the global food market, which is extremely vulnerable, which what we've seen under COVID, right, where people were stocking up on foods and the shelves were empty. There, you know, and similarly to what Kathryn was mentioning around, you know, drought and environmental challenges, there's a lot of vulnerabilities and lack of biodiversity in the food. And that's really what we're being dependent on to set up this whole system. And so what's important is that how do we have alternatives on a local level and how can we invest those resources in ways that help create opportunities for communities to be more self-determined to support themselves. And we need to really look at how can we support community empowerment models so that those communities of color, the Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities are the ones that are driving these solutions to the future and really directing how resources are being made as they see fit, not coming from the outside and being kind of imposed, these solutions that are imposed on the communities. And with the direct connections to poverty, we really have to look at how can we generate wealth in these communities and pay attention to building out food economies. And so this straightforward map is kind of something that I like to show of really just how complex the global food system is. And so when you look at, you know, everything that goes into it on a global level, so many ways that we're looking at addressing hunger on a global level can really be impacted by that, right? And so thinking about climate and environment, thinking about economics, there's a lot of challenges to this, right? So which again, I think just speaks to the need to have alternatives on a local level. And this is often also really tied into market-driven solutions, right? And so we heard that the cost of food is going up, right? And so this system is really dependent on exploitation of labor and market-driven values, right? And so making profits out of foods, and that's never going to be designed to support poor people, right? And to lift people up out of poverty and to make it so that they have more access to food for themselves. And so we really need to, again, have this different shift, right? Way to address systemic inequities and racial injustice, as a lens to look at these multiple issues that are facing and having more of a holistic view that's looking beyond just the point of consumption, right? Hunger and food insecurity is wrapped up in this process. And we often look at the point of consumption, but it's tied to that complex system. So we really have to look at more upstream solutions. And it's really important that we hold the needs of Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities as our top priority, because that's where we're seeing the greatest inequities and the greatest challenges and the greatest marginalization in the decision-making process and how resources are being allocated. And if we do that, you know, we can look at how we can incorporate environmental justice practices, regenerative agricultural, things that are taking better care of the earth, economic wealth generation, and most importantly, the right for communities to be self-determined in making decisions for how they feed themselves. So you know, these are just some things that I also wanted to point out that I think is important in our analysis of hunger and food issues. Hunger is really something that has been and thinking again, just at the point of consumption, we're seeing the inequities grow, and we're seeing it being a moving target. Food insecurity has actually risen exponentially in the country, and we have not changed our approach to it. And so what has happened is more and more resources get thrown into the same types of programs that are chasing a goal that is continuously growing. And so there's always a gap, and we're always looking at getting more resources to close those gaps, and we're not addressing the inequity of the problem. And so we really have to look at how we're including systemic inequity, poverty in our relationship with land, in our analysis of what food inequity means. And so I wanted to add some terms that I know are commonly used just for how we're thinking about it. So food deserts and food swamps are often used to describe communities facing food challenges. And I really encourage everyone not to use those for a few reasons. One, it paints the picture that those environments are natural and they're naturally occurring, and just certain communities are going to face these deficits. Also, similarly to how we view, deserts as being barren and void of resources, and swamps being kind of oversaturated and dangerous places. Communities that are labeled food deserts and food swamps actually have a lot of resources and a lot of strengths and a lot of assets. And we don't want to make it seem like they need to be saved from the outside. They actually have the ability to solve their own problems. And then lastly, it also does not do credit to the indigenous practices that have lived in these environments, that have actually learned how to thrive and have agricultural practices in deserts and swamp environments, and learn to live in harmony with the land and feed themselves. And so a growing term that's being used to describe this is looking more at food apartheid, which really helps capture the racism and the systemic nature that has produced these inequities. And so again, our use of language is powerful in thinking about how we're describing these issues and linking them to our history of racism and system inequity. Some of the things that are happening more on a local level, I would definitely recommend everyone who is a landowner to look into the Shumi land tax. I know it's based in the East Bay. I'm not sure what its relationship is to Marin, but it's a land tax, and it's something that you can pay into the value that you own, that can go into as a way to and access what the Marin Museum of the American Indian also has created a youth program that I've heard of trying to reconnect back to using acorn as a diet, as a staple diet, and trying to create protein bars that are acorn based, and having a youth economic development program that's tied with that. What we've seen around an increased need under COVID is also an increased rise in mutual aid. And so communities coming together to support themselves. And so there's community fridges programs that has really popped up over Oakland. And I think it's building in Marin as well, where there's fridges, you can just go donate food and stock it, and it's on an honor system where anyone who's in need can go access the fridge. You can even host a fridge in your community, and just have that out on the street, and get your neighbors together to help support the need in the community where you live. The Bolinas Kitchen Project has actually created a program of sourcing local agricultural products from the food producers in West Marin, and has a community kitchen where they bring in sponsor chefs to make hot meals programs that they can deliver it out to communities in need. Just across the bridge in Richmond, we have an amazing organization, Urban Tilth, that recently won the World Food Sovereignty Prize, where they have a number of really innovative programs. They have a farm in North Richmond. They created a Richmond Greenway project where they're doing food forest and public space to look at, again, the community-based food security opportunities. And then a program that is really good, worth looking into, is Soulfire Farms, which has recently, the owner has produced the book Farming While Black, and their website has a policy platform agenda, and has a number of ways to look at how to create more equity within the food system. And really, again, highlighting the need to follow the leadership of people of color ran organizations that are based in these communities. And there are really amazing solutions that are being produced not far from your doorstep. So highly recommend looking more in. Thinking about, what can you do? I think there's a way to look at what resources do you have. Are you able to donate time, skills, funds to Black organizations? If you're a landowner, thinking about what our relationship to the land is and how really important that we step back, especially myself being a white man, and look at how people of color can really be setting the lead and setting the direction for how do we address these issues. How can, looking at supporting food businesses right now, the restaurant system is really being hit heavily. And so how can you spend your money in supporting those restaurants and those businesses that have a huge need right now? And yeah, I think, if you have more of a political voice, how can you contact your local legislators and, ask them what they're doing to ensure that decision-making and how resources are being allocated are being led by these communities, or these BIPOC communities are being involved in the decision-making. Right now, we're seeing a lot of challenges around food worker rights being protected. Can you leverage your voice to ensure that those rights are upheld? And as we're seeing, again, these vulnerabilities within the food system and the need for food workers to be protected and safe from COVID, have not, being earning wages so that they're facing food insecurity themselves, while they're picking food all day, but they can't eat it. I think that is another opportunity to do. And most importantly, step back and try to connect with local groups that are being driven by communities of color and follow their leads. Is what I got.
Great. So I'm going to invite everyone to unmute yourself to applaud for our speaker. Thank you, Ryan.
Kathryn made it back too.
Great. Thanks so much. So happily, it looks like Kathryn has made it back on. So looks like we're going to be just a few minutes behind. But Kathryn, are you in a position to be able to finish up your slides?
I apologize, everyone. I have no idea what happened, but once I was booted off, it wouldn't let me back in. So then I did go off and come back. But anyway, Paul, did my slides come through to you by chance? Paul had offered to help. I was just afraid if I did it again, I could try.
No, unfortunately, they did not.
Okay.
They did not come through.
All right.
I think you said maybe they're too big.
Yeah. Well, I'll try it very quickly, but if not,
How many more did you have, Kathryn?
Just 6. So maybe we should just go back and.
Because we were going to move to the Q&A now, but oh great, you're successfully sharing your screen.
Yeah, but I don't have the slides up. So let's just go on and go back and just have the Q&A now, because I know you're running late.
Okay. Great. Well, I apologize for that. I don't know what Zoom's problem was. Just so you guys know who are on the call, we were, and I think you have to end your screen sharing, Kathryn. We were having chats back and forth trying to figure out why on earth Zoom wouldn't let Kathryn back in. Like, she was trying and trying and trying. She finally was able to call in, and then finally it let her back in on her computer. So heavy sigh.
Anyway, let's take some questions. And Ryan, I did get some of your presentation. Excellent. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. Thank you very much. And let's give Kathryn a round of applause.
Sorry.
Thank you, Kathryn. Okay, great. So we are going to move into our Q&A, and I will lead the Q&A. And so just to kind of reiterate, the purpose of having these discussions, these events for the SDGs is we're kind of trying to hold the question, can Marin County meet the Sustainable Development Goals? But obviously Marin County is not an isolated island. I mean, sure, in some ways every county is, and every community has its own, boundaries, but nevertheless, we're deeply informed by the state and the national and the global food system, increasingly global. And so that's why it's helpful, obviously, to have the bigger picture that Kathryn shared with us as well. So if you have a question, feel free to either hold your hand up so I can see it and I'll call on you, or enter it into the chat, or you can use the little reactions, or I don't know, there's some sort of Zoom function where you can raise your hand. Okay, I see Marcia raising her hand.
Yeah, I just wondered if shopping at farmers markets is helpful at all. Local produce.
So Ryan, did you have a comment about that?
I mean, is that something that individuals can do? Is that at all helpful?
Yeah, great question. I would say absolutely. I would encourage you to also, think about the distinction between farmers and farm workers, and ensuring that farmers are supporting their farm workers, and that those are livelihoods that are being respected and taken care of. And I think one of the challenges that we're seeing is actually that we have been seeing for decades now, is the loss of diversity of farmers who have access to land to enter into markets. And so one of our partners through the HEAL Collaborative, the Agricultural Institute of Marin, runs a number of farmers markets throughout the Bay Area, and they are actively trying to seek Black farmers to engage in their farmers markets. And there's really huge loss of farmers, Black farmers in this country, that have had a series of policies that have not enforced that. And so I think that the shopping at a farmer's market, yes. And I would encourage you to think further about, maybe there are legislators that you could contact that look at how can more resources be available to grow the ability for farm worker, or for people of color, to have access to land to become farmers. And we're seeing an aging out of farmers in this country, and can actually be a huge challenge over the next couple of decades as farming population ages out, and we're not replacing them at a rate that we're needing to, and especially thinking about the equity and sustainability and environmental practices that go inherent with that.
Great, thank you, Ryan. And thanks for that question, Marcia. Zoe, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of answered. I was just wondering, I mean, first of all, thank you to both of our speakers. And Ryan, in your presentation, I really liked how you made a distinction between kind of like just helping improve the safety net and actually fixing the issue. So I was just going to ask, what do you think us as like everyday kind of like people could do in order to help kind of like fix the issue, as opposed to just strengthen the safety net, which is obviously very important too. But that was kind of answered with the call to legislators and stuff. Is there anything else that you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, if you're able to donate, resources and times and skills to some of these organizations, I think, there is support that can be needed, and looking to them as to what that looks like. There's also what we've recently seen in the rise around the calls around, Black Lives Matters throughout the country. The Movement for Black Lives has a whole policy platform on their webpage. Also, Soulflower Farms running into that. There's ways that to think about how to engage in that space, and engage your peers in becoming, lifting up voices around that to decision makers.
Great, thank you. Further questions? Bryson?
Yeah, so I guess I have one question. My question is that why is it that food prices, or I guess what are the main reasons for why food prices have been increasing so much in the Bay Area as of recently? And is this caused by like a systematic issue, or is it just based on like certain like economic trends or something like that? Do you know any information on that?
Not specifically. I mean, generally, a lot of food prices are supported or not by large subsidies for certain crops to be grown. And so I think as I think what Kathryn was speaking, thinking about cost of fuels, the challenges of moving food across the world and across the country. We've also had a lot of export issues around tariffs and taxes and things of that nature. So I can't speak specifically to costs being risen or for certain types of products and what country it's being grown in, the geopolitical environment, all those factor in. But yeah, it is a challenge, and thinking again around how that's plugging into a global system that is just highly complex. And Kathryn, I don't know if you have more experience in what that looks like.
Just to say,
Yeah.
Kathryn, you're on mute again.
so all of the supply chains have been disrupted. So I think across the border of Mexico and Canada and other places has been made more difficult, and that makes things more precious. And then through climate change, we've had a lot of crops be negatively affected. All of those things contribute to price increases in food.
Thank you.
I actually had a clarifying question for you, Kathryn, which was, I believe I heard you say that we were globally making progress on reducing hunger and that trend has reversed.
Yes, for decades we were making progress. And then we started seeing through conflicts around the world, the huge increase in numbers of refugees, many of whom are fed by WFP and are food insecure. And then, so that's why this UN Peace Prize is so appropriate, because lack of food creates greater conflict, and it's a kind of a vicious cycle, and that creates more hunger in the world. So right now we are falling further behind. David Beasley, the head of WFP, because of this, as many as 70 million additional people that will be on the hunger rolls in this coming 6 months, he's asking the billionaires of the world for $5 billion to solve the problem. So it's an interesting strategy to see how they're going to make up the shortfall. And by the way, no dues dollars pay for the $8 billion largest humanitarian organization in the world, the WFP budget. No dues dollars go to that. It's all through countries. And I'm proud to say that America is the largest contributing country in a lot of bilateral, bipartisan support for food aid around the world and in our country. But they're all countries, because of these problems economically that COVID and other things are creating, are going to feel hard pressed to support WFP to the level it needs. So in terms of how we all can get involved supporting these efforts financially, and in some of the other ways that Brian suggested, are really critical.
Alicia, I have a question if we have time.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So thank you to both our speakers. I found a common theme between the two topics, the related topics, obviously, and that is the fact is, we tend to think of the food as a supply chain and grown and it gets out to the consumer. But as you both pointed out, it's really a societal undertaking. Kathryn, you pointed out the fact that female farmers are more successful than male farmers. I think that should be pretty obvious why that is the case. It's been proven in many, many different ways in micro lending and whatnot because of choices about where to spend the time and the money. But Ryan, you made the same point with the great graphic showing it's all one connected system of systems. So what is a system-wide approach from both of your perspectives? What is a system-wide approach to beat the overall challenge of hunger? Thank you.
Well, I'll jump in, and then I'd love to hear Ryan's thoughts. I think that it gets back to regenerative agriculture. I think we're going to have to take climate change into account and really take care of our soil. And it gets back to some global cooperation around setting global targets. And of course, there's a lot of innovation in ag that's come about, and we're seeing hydroponics and a whole host of other vertical farms, et cetera. All of those things hold some great promise. But we need better, both national and regional and global food policies, and we need more resilient food systems. And we can't get there without addressing, in my opinion, climate change and gender equity. All of these things, again, are highly interconnected. But I do think it does get back to the quality of the soil. We know the quality of the soil affects the nutrients in the food, and we need higher nutrient food. And that's one of the reasons in Africa, WFP and others are working to help farmers maintain soil quality so they don't have to bring in expensive fertilizers that can degrade the quality of the soil. So it's a complex set of issues, but those are a few thoughts. Ryan, what would you add?
And I agree 100% in that. And I guess thinking again, connecting it to local levels, I think, we really need to be looking at how we can produce food within local levels. And so there was a report that was done a couple years ago in Oakland that found that utilizing public lands, Oakland could grow maybe 10 to 15% of its vegetable consumption within its borders. And so I think, there was, the Victory Garden program back in World War II that can, may not be the best name of looking at, how that's duplicating indigenous practices, right? Have been doing this for decades. But, upwards of, I think it was 50 or 60% of the vegetables in the country were grown in Victory Gardens under that program. So there's huge potential in looking at how can each city, each county grow 10, 25% of its own food, and how do we have it be an economic workforce development piece, right? How can we go into communities that are being most impacted by poverty, low-income communities, communities of color, and how can we create workforce development opportunities around this? And how can we invest in those as programs and not look at it as being a profit-driven, financially lucrative program, but how can we do it as a societal rebuild, right? We pay farmers, huge amounts of money to grow corn, to create high fructose corn syrup, right? And if that's not being harvested, right, they're getting paid guarantees. But we don't have that for small scale farmers that are looking at regenerative agricultural practices. As Kathryn mentioned, it's starting to grow more. It's starting to become more popular. But we need to make those linkages to the environment, to the economy, and really prioritize the needs of communities of color and look how do we lift up more farmers of color to really lead these work, who are coming from cultures that have engaged in these practices that now we call them permaculture or we call them regenerative, right? Those are really traditional practices, and that's what we really need to get back to and follow their leads.
Very important points. Thank you, Ryan and Kathryn. So we have two more hands that have raised, Sandra, and then I believe Lynn, and I think that's all we'll have time for in terms of questions. So Sandra.
Okay, thank you so much, first of all, for the chapter for having this wonderful session and event, and Kathryn and Ryan, both for your presentations. It's really been wonderful. I've spent my entire career in the food and beverage industry, so it's always wonderful to have more information. I wanted to share one organization for everyone to just be aware of called the Community Alliance for Family Farmers. And they're an organization in California that is specifically trying to help independent farmers to survive and do various programs. So I just wanted to share that. And also wondered if both presentations would be available either via a link or if it would be possible to send them. And I know Ryan shared his contact info, but Kathryn, I know you were cut off. I didn't know if you were open to sharing an email or whatnot for some additional conversation.
Absolutely. Happy to have Bonnie do that. And I have made my slides available to the team, and we will get it on the website as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Great. And Kathryn, you're welcome to put your email in the chat. And also, Sandra, if you somehow don't get it, you're welcome to email us and we'll make sure you get that. And Lynn?
Hi, thank you, Felicia. Ryan, I just had kind of a quick question. I love the idea of local entities producing 25 to, would you say 50% of our produce. And I used to belong to a community garden. It was probably one of the most positive experiences in my life. My question is, with all of this farming coming up, what is going to happen along the lines of rodents? I hear this quite often for people that are speaking out against this. I kind of was wondering if you had any feedback on that.
Yeah, I mean, that can be a challenge. I actually started up my food working in the Tenderloin, where they have some massive rodent challenges. Yeah, I mean, there are ways to do pest mitigation by using companion crop plantings or essential oils, or it all kind of depends on what what challenges you're facing, and what part of the city or area that you're looking at, or deer or rats, right? That looks different. But yeah, I mean, being tied to the earth and tied to nature, right? You deal with some parts of nature that we might not want to engage living in cities, right? So that comes with it, and there are creative solutions for dealing with it.
Okay, thank you. I was just kind of curious.
All right, and I'll just add to that, owl boxes. I've heard about owl boxes being installed to help with our rodent issues. So we don't have time for any more questions. Sorry, Marcia, are you trying to say something? You're waving around.
The movie, Biggest Little Farm.
Oh yes, thank you for that recommendation. Movie recommendation, The Biggest Little Farm documentary, very inspiring. All right, so that concludes the Q&A, and we're going to move on now to our fun quiz, courtesy of Zoe, our board member. Take it away, Zoe.
Hi, yeah, so I'm about to share my screen with you, and we're gonna do a Kahoot. So who in here knows what a Kahoot is? Show of hands. Anyone? Yeah, so you guys know it's kind of like a quiz, and you just have to put in a pin on your phone, and like you'll get it. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and then there'll be some instructions as to that. There's only 5 questions. It's supposed to be really short and fun, and should just solidify what we learned today. And there's prizes. All right, let me share my screen. All right, so can you guys see my screen? Yeah. All right, perfect. So I'm gonna say play now. Whoa, we're gonna go for teach. We're getting there. Oh my gosh. Okay, classic. All right, we're there. Oh, wow. All right, so you guys see the instructions. Go to www.kahoot.it, and then I'll ask you for a pin, and you're just gonna put this in. Yes, on your phone. Although you could also do it in your laptop, because I think the questions pop up. Hey, Rebecca, first person. Guys, it's almost like it's in person. We have a classroom, we have all the little chairs.
Wait, the pin, what's the pin?
The pin is 829
Okay.
0314.